Okay, let's see. So far, nobody, I think. Ah, welcome to the last Q&A session of this iteration. But let's wait one more minute or so if somebody else shows up. But of course, as always, you can already start typing your questions or also then ask them live if you like. Was there anything on Stack Exchange that we should answer here?
I think not.
Okay.
No.
Okay, good. I suppose we can get started. If any of you has a question, please ask them.
Or if you have any feedback on the Bluetooth Pioneer now that it's finished.
Yes, of course. That is also always welcome. And we internally were quite proud of this iteration for various reasons. I mean, one was we think the setup was much easier now that with the, what's it called? The TX pipe thing and the local Docker container as well. And also, I think it was nice that people like Robertino and Thomas and basically everybody this time contributed much more. So I hope that led to more variety. And yeah, but we are happy to hear your feedback as well. If you don't have any questions.
There is one in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Oh, is there? Sorry. It closed automatically again. I'll answer that then. Right. On lecture 9, stablecoin, some questions for Robertino. Okay, I can read them and Robertino can answer them. The stablecoin project is very impressive and very detailed. I didn't have any questions about it last week because I'm still processing it. Just out of curiosity, how many man days did it take you to write all the code for this project? I don't know, should I read all 3 first or do you want to answer in between?
No, maybe just answer in between because so I don't forget. But I'm not sure. Maybe, I mean, I didn't start from scratch because Sengun already had some smart contracts that I use like most of the logic. But I think that if you already have some practice, it took me around maybe a week and something, including like making the UI not ugly and like making the responsiveness of the buttons so you don't like actually try to deploy something that you don't have and stuff like that. So like the hardest part is like figuring out the logic of the smart contract to make sure that they work and writing proper like testing. And once you have that, the rest like flows because the off-chain code depends on the off-chain and the intention you want to assign to the user. So that just goes maybe just a couple of weeks. It could take you now that you have these examples to go for. And the question 2 is copying pasting the Bluetooth or in the Lucid code is the only way we can pull the validator minting script into TypeScript. You can read from a file. Like
Thomas said he has a solution on screen. Maybe he can answer that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think just out of laziness, we did that in the Pioneer program, but indeed, in normal setups, you might want to iterate your script and deploy it immediately in Lucid for testing, stuff like that. And then, of course, you do not want to do that. So let's see if I can share it.
I have a big, there you go.
Yeah, so for example, yeah, this is in Dino, but in Node it's the same. So I read here a policy, or I have a function that reads a policy. It's an asynchronous function, which promises a minting policy. And what it does is it parses a file as JSON, and the file it parses is just the thing that we normally get as an artifact when we write it with Haskell to the file system. And it reads that as as JSON. And then what we return is just a tuple of type Plutus v2, and note that you should use Plutus v2 or v1 here, and yeah, not what we have here, like Plutus script v2. So that's different in Lucid. So please note that you cannot copy that. And then we just yes, I was writing something here that is not complete here, but then you just well, from the validator you can grab the CBOR hex, and that just returns like this with the key CBOR hex. So that's how you can do it from a file. Hope that clarifies it.
I think he also was talking about automatically somehow kicking off the compilation. I suppose I don't know, probably you can do that from TypeScript, like start.
Yeah, well,
Cabal, I suppose.
Yeah, that can be done as well, or
yeah, you have the watch command, and you could output the file in a specific place. So like every time you save a file, you can run that. And if you read the file using, like, for example, this Dino text read text file, like everything will be in sync.
Right. And I mean, normally you wouldn't, I mean, in the end, I mean, it's not done. I mean, at the end, you have like the version of the smart contract. And for development, I suppose you can also set up your build system that way that it always, I mean, like this make file, that it runs the Haskell to write the script and then does the TypeScript thing. So yes, certainly possible. And the third part,
if you use a different tool, if you use a different tool, like pretty much every programming language has the read from file functionality. So it's like you can adapt the idea of reading from the file to any tool, any off-chain tool you want to use.
Right. I mean, if I understand the question correctly, it's also about in which the TypeScript can kick off the Haskell Plutus code compilation step and import the result. I mean, you covered the import the result part, and this kick off the Haskell Plutus code compilation step. I suppose you could do that. I'm sure in TypeScript, in Dino, you can call
in Dino there's a
processes.
Yeah, that's possible.
Right. But I think normally you wouldn't do that, and you would rather have something on top like make or some whatever build system that would coordinate that and call the various, I mean, do the various compilation steps, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you could also do it from TypeScript.
You can run shell commands from Dino and from Node. So you can do anything if you want.
Right. And the third question, you store the collateral validator and the coin minting policy as a ref script on the blockchain, but not the Oracle NFT minting script. Is there a reason for that? Or more general, is there a reason to store certain Pluto scripts as ref scripts, but others should never, ever be stored as ref scripts on the blockchain? Maybe I can answer that. I mean, Robertino can correct me if I'm wrong, but I suppose this Oracle NFT script is only used once to set up the Oracle in the beginning, right? You only need
Yes,
one NFT.
it depends on the. I mean, both the Oracle and the minting policy depend on the hash of the developer. But so in this case, like it makes sense to iterate faster, but there's no reason why I did that. I could have use as reference script same as the minting policy, because the minting policy also changed like every time. So I just did it to have something different, but in reality, like in practice, I will have used the 3 as reference scripts.
Yes, and I would think, I mean, there are cases where you only need a script once. I mean, if you set something up once or very seldom, or where it changes a lot. I mean, we talked about parameterized scripts. And I mean, in some situations, basically each time you use a script, it's not really the same script because you apply it to different parameters. And I mean, reference scripts are mostly useful, I would say, when, I mean, are only use actually only, I mean, you can't use a reference script and then later apply parameters, right? You can't. So that makes only sense if it's fully saturated already. So in situations where, as I said, I mean, if you have a parameterized script where you always use it with different parameters, it wouldn't make much sense to use a reference script, because then you only I mean, if you only reference it once, then the cost of deploying the reference script is higher than what you save by using it. But it also, of course, depends who does what. I mean, maybe the entity that deploys the reference script is a different one than the one that pays for the transactions that use it. So it's also a matter of whom the designer of the system wants to pay what. I mean, maybe if you design whatever and some platform, some smart contract platform, and your users are interacting with your scripts, and you want to make it cheap for your users, then you can basically cover up the cost to deploy the reference scripts, and then it's cheaper for your users to pay for the transactions. Whereas if you yourself pay for the transactions, then maybe it's a different arithmetic. So it depends. But I think it's mostly a matter of cost and size. I mean, on the one hand, I mean, then it's just, you must just do the calculation. I mean, on the one hand, deploying a reference script is quite costly. I mean, it's in the order of magnitude of 10 or 20 ADA, I think. I mean, it's all relative, but it's much more costly than a normal transaction. Whereas, and then of course, on the other side, I mean, if you use a reference script instead of the full validator, then you save bytes in your transaction. So it makes the transaction cheaper. But I mean, of course, not, I don't know how much, maybe, I don't know, 0.1 ADA or 0.2 ADA or whatever. So then it depends on, and so that means you must at least use it, I don't know, 10 times or 20 times for it to make worth the cost of deploying it in the first place. So yeah, it's this trade-off.
Yeah, in my case, like in the stablecoin case, like you should have used the like in a real scenario, you use also the Oracle as a reference script, because you will be like updating it maybe every block. So like in a little short period of time, you already like saved a bunch of money. Unless like it's updated, it's an Oracle that doesn't have a constantly updated value, maybe something that changes once a month or something like that. Maybe in that case wouldn't make sense, but in the stablecoin case, it makes more sense to use the reference script.
Right, and maybe it's also a question of how sure you are about your smart contract, whether it will probably be like that for months or years, or whether, I mean, yeah, because if it, I mean, once it's, and then of course it depends again, we discussed that before, I think, where you deploy your reference script to, whether you put it in some black hole where it sits forever, or whether you just have it in your wallet and then you can like spend it again during development or so. So I mean, it's all these considerations. Okay, and then Willem just clarified that it was more about compilation, just not reading the file in question 2. But I think we did answer that as well, that you can, if you want, from TypeScript, you could call Cabal, for example, to do the compilation. But I I think you probably normally wouldn't do that and would just, as I said, I mean, have a make file or something that does these things, or whatever, nix or. Okay. I think that was the only question. Does anybody else has a question? There's another one. Lecture 10, alternatives to Haskell Plutus. Question, the optimization example given in the Offshin video is very impressive, plutonomy, CLI, and AB. But can you trust these optimizations? For example, can you be sure the function of your validator changes or that subtle bugs are introduced or that the security is compromised? Remark, I have one alternative to add that I've come to like a lot over the past half year. It's Helios BT. Thank you for that. Maybe we should have a look at that as well. To answer the question, I think it's a very good question. And I think it's, even if you forget about the alternatives and just look at Plutus, I mean, it's already a very good question. I mean, how can you be sure that the Plutus compiler itself does what it's supposed to do? And I do know that IOG is working on that. I mean, there are research programs try to basically formally prove the correctness of the Plutus compiler, for example. And I suppose it also means that, I mean, audit probably should not just happen on the code level, but like actually on the blockchain. I mean, work with the compiled code and not just the source code. Then, I mean, if you work with the actual, if you test the actual, I mean, for example, a private testnet or something where you have the actual code, the actual compiled Plutus core script. Then it doesn't matter whether the compiler has a mistake if you test against that. But I mean, in general, I think it's a very good question and not so easy to answer. And I think that, I mean, is a concern, of course. So I also don't know whether, I mean, I suppose it's a matter of how much you trust these projects. I don't know whether anybody else has something to add to that.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's a matter of if you trust, if it's not making any changes. Supposedly, when using plutonomy, if you don't use the strict flag, it wouldn't change the final result, the logic of the final result. But yeah, you have to trust. And in heavy is like a variant of option that is a functional, strictly functional Python. And I'm guessing that makes it way easier to, that's why it's more optimal, like it's more optimized than the strict, than the irregular option. But yeah, it's a matter of trust. If you trust the plutonomy CLI, or you can actually, the code's open source, so you can like take a look and see what it does.
But I do think it's a very good question. I mean, especially because we always make a big, I mean, we always say that it's important, I mean, that Cardano smart contracts can be formally verified, blah, blah, blah. And that's an obvious gap, right? That you, I mean, you would need, eventually you would need to somehow formally verify all these tools, these compilers, that they actually do what they are supposed to do. I think that's, I mean, it's, but IOG at least is aware of that, I think. There are efforts in that direction. And yeah, it's really a matter of trust. And I mean, plutonomy, for example, I think is, I don't know about plutonomy CLI, but plutonomy is from well-typed. And well-typed are, after all, the people that basically built the Cardano node. So I would say they are pretty trustworthy. But yeah, it always depends, I suppose. But very good question. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, the plutonomy CLI is a wrapper around plutonomy. So
Okay, right. Okay, Albert has a question. One of the strengths of Cardano is determinism, and my understanding is that functional programming is a contributor to that. How do writing smart contracts with object-oriented programming languages that compile into Plutus Core affect this in terms of security as well? This partially answered a minute ago. Also a very good question. I mean, if it was up to me, I mean, I wouldn't want anything in Python or JavaScript or so. But I mean, it's also a matter of what. I mean, a lot of people, I mean, even though we all love Haskell, I mean, a lot of people don't know it. And so then, I mean, what gives you more security if you train a JavaScript developer in Haskell or a Python developer, and then he writes Plutus in a secure language, but a language he is very uncomfortable and unfamiliar with, or if you, I mean, if he uses Python that he's comfortable with, but then maybe the programming model is not as good. So I think it's also a trade-off and just a way to basically reach more people and cater to different tastes and what people are comfortable with. But in general, it's true, of course. I mean, it's a very good point. I think in an ideal world, everything would be written in Haskell or in a functional programming language. And I think that would be more secure indeed. But maybe that's just my personal opinion. I mean, obviously, this has been done because a lot of, I mean, one of the biggest complaints about Cardano is Haskell, that, I mean, that the learning curve is so steep. And this is obviously an attempt to make that easier for people to gather more developers to the ecosystem. But I do believe that it comes with a security cost, indeed.
Yeah, and just like a little asterisk is that even though people are using JavaScript and Python, those are general purpose languages, not strictly object oriented. So you're actually using functional programming, not purely or in strict functional, but at the end is functional programming. And so it's not like you are creating objects with methods and converting that into functional Bluetooth core. It's more a direct path. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point as well. Yes, thank you. And I suppose the same is true for JavaScript and TypeScript and so on. I mean, they're all, I mean, these days, basically every programming language has Lambda expressions, for example. So there are lots of ideas from functional programming that have entered more mainstream languages as well. So yeah, that's true, of course. Okay, any more questions? You also don't have to type them. You can also ask directly if you want.
Great questions so far.
Yes, indeed. Yes, the level of questions in this iteration is much better than it used to be, I think. I mean, it used to be on the level of what's the difference between on-chain and off-chain code and so on, which is all, of course, legitimate questions, but these are much more interesting. Okay. But if you want, you can also ask what's the difference between on-chain and off-chain code. I didn't want to scare anybody away now. Okay. Nobody, any more questions? Oh, there's a message.
There's some feedback from Willem, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Thanks a million, all of you, for everything you've done. It's been a great and challenging experience once again. Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you very much. So, yeah, what else? So maybe, I mean, it's only 4 people here, but I mean, we are considering maybe not doing another iteration in this form and instead doing something interesting, like more, for example, more of these stablecoin examples that Robertino did, or like applications or best practices or something like that. And because I mean, at least at the moment, Pluto seems to be relatively stable. So maybe it's not necessary to do another iteration in this form, but we haven't decided that yet. It was just an idea to maybe offer something for those of you that have maybe done several iterations already and know all the basics and don't want to listen to the extended UTXO model over and over again, and instead doing something like more applications or examples or things like that.
And we might do a self-paced course, Lars, as well. Didn't we discuss that, where we kind of package
Yes.
this content up? And so we almost have two streams. We have a self-paced, course that's available, and then we do like a solution-based fifth cohort, maybe. That's more practical with, actual problems to solve.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And also, we don't want to promise too much or say too much, but it might be that this time we will have certificates. And then for you, of course, but also probably for everyone. I mean, for the pioneers of the previous iterations, if they want. But that's also still like ongoing.
Mhm.
I mean, we have been meaning to do that from iteration 1, that there were always problems, but now we are closer than ever to solving the problem. So there's a very good chance that that's happening. And then I suppose, I don't know how we will inform everyone about it. I mean, probably, definitely on Discord, and I don't know, maybe also Cardano 360 or something. How
Yeah, I
that
guess we
works and
can
what you need to do.
make some kind of announcement, Lars. In terms of feedback as well, we'll do a survey. So we'll probably, have a look at that over the next week or two and circulate that and encourage you all to give us your feedback, which will be great, so that we can bring it into the next cohort and make improvements.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
And that's very important, the feedback, because it was because of feedback from other pioneers that, for example, this time we had this dramatically simplified setup.
Mhm.
Because that was always, I think, the difficulty of Haskell and the setup were the two main pain points in previous iterations. So we do listen, but of course we need to have the feedback in the first place to be able to do something about it.
And it was the feedback from the previous cohort that basically created the premise for the Haskell Bootcamp as well. So it was very valuable, and it allows us to plan then and fill some gaps and spend time where people need more guidance and more help.
Exactly. Okay, then if there are no more questions, I suppose we can wrap it up. And I mean, we also haven't decided, but I do think,
Oh, there is a question, I think, Lars, maybe.
a question to the question.
I don't see it.
Question to the question.
I only see.
It's a
You
comment
see-
from in a previous question.
I mean, who asked that?
Yeah, Albert. I think Albert says, hi, one of the trends of Cardano is
Oh, I see. Now I see it. Right. Thanks for the answer, Python programming here. A lot of Haskell methods I've seen in this course I've used in Python. Okay. Wondering what is the real advantage of me learning Haskell versus just using Python as a functional language? I mean, there are some advantages that, it's a good question as well. But Haskell, first of all, type system. Haskell is strongly typed. And especially for bigger projects, I think I've once talked to a Python developer, somebody that had to work with Python. He said it's a huge pain if your project becomes big, because in all the tests, you always have to test that you actually get the right type and so on passed into your functions. So you always have to, in every function, you have to first check the types of the incoming arguments. And refactoring is a nightmare, because if you change a type somewhere, then the compiler doesn't help you to find all the spots that you have to change. So strongly typed is a very big advantage, I think, of Haskell. Then the pureness, I think, is a very big advantage. And that also, the strict separation, for example, of I/O and other things, and that functions can't have side effects. And that allows things that in principle can only do in Haskell, like property-based testing. I mean, I know that in other languages, probably also in Python, there are libraries for that. But I mean, the like in its true form, I think you can only do it in a pure language. And of course, I mean, the level of abstraction, it's not just types. And I mean, then algebraic data types, I think, are very nice. So for a lot of like modeling certain situations, often algebraic business data types are what you want, and that's awkward to do in other languages that don't have them. And of course, I mean, Haskell also has things like, I mean, higher kinds like monads and so on, which is extremely powerful. So you can work on a much higher level of abstraction. So I think it's certainly, I mean, using functional methods in Python is better than not using them, but I still think it's worth using, I mean, learning Haskell, just even if you don't use it, just for the different perspective it gives you on things. Okay, otherwise this iteration has been really awesome. Thanks for that. Great. Okay, have I overlooked any other questions?
I don't think so.
Now I unfolded all the collapsed things. Right. Yeah, I mean, this last point, I just want to say that I think that's really true. I mean, I was always a fan of exotic programming language like Lisp and Prolog. And I think each of them, I mean, if it's very different to others, that's always a win, even if you never use it professionally, because it gives you a different view on problems, and that always helps, even, I mean, no matter in which language you end up working, I think. Okay, yeah, then thank you once again for staying with us to the very end. And thank you for all your great questions, and hope we give feedback. And I mean, we will have something upcoming. I mean, in the last summer also, we did this monthly Q&A, so maybe we do that again. So not every week, but maybe once a month, some Pluto's Q&A. And then, of course, this what we talked about briefly before, the next iteration that might be different to these ones, where we concentrate more on like cool examples or end-to-end examples and things like that. Okay, yeah, happy to hear that. And of course, yeah, thank you everyone, and hope to see you again soon in another course or whatever.
Lars, Albert,
Yes.
I think have some comment.
Albert has a comment.
Hello. Just really quickly, I
sorry,
didn't want to
yeah.
interrupt. I know you were
No.
ending the Q&A, but I really wanted to say this verbally. Really enjoyed this class. Thank you, everyone. It's really, it's very obvious that the preparation for this class was made with the best intentions and with a lot of care. So I just wanted to say that all of this is appreciated, and I really enjoyed this iteration. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. Yes.
Okay. Right, then thank you very much again, and hope to see you all again soon elsewhere. Thank you. Take care, all of you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks.
Bye.